Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Rebecca. I wanted to share today some things that I learned about being a first-year gardener, and for the most part it's a list of things that you should not do or things that you should do instead. But one of the very first things I want to share is how gratifying it is to actually have a garden. So I absolutely loved being able to come out to my garden, pick some vegetables, and then go inside, wash them up, and cook them for my family. Loved that. That was the best part for me. Just being able to actually have a garden. It did not produce as much as I would have liked it to, but that is one of the things that I learned, and I'll talk about in a second. But so aside from that, other thing I learned is to plan your space. So I did not plan my space very well. As some of you know who've watched my other videos, this has been quite a journey. Getting this garden up and running from the state it was in to now, it took a ton of work, and I really didn't plan my space properly. There were still some things growing in the garden that I wasn't sure of what they were, that I could have gotten rid of. So that would be my first thing. Plan your space, make a diagram of your garden, and then mark down where you're going to plant all of your different vegetables and fruits, because I did not utilize my space well, and I could have really planted a lot more had I made a diagram of the garden and then plotted out where I was going to plant each thing. So that is one of my very first tips. Make a diagram, have a plan, and then plant things next to each other that grow well next to one another. Another thing that I learned is that I needed to plant way more than I did. So like, for example, I only had one summer squash plant, I only had one zucchini plant, and my zucchini plant only produced 2 zucchinis for the whole season. There is still flowers on it now. Something keeps eating it, or they keep dying. I'm not sure what's happening. But had I planned for that, only one plant producing, then I could have planted 2 and come out with a much better outcome. So definitely, like, I planted potatoes for the first time, and I planted them in a container, which I think worked well, but I should have done like 5 more containers. I did get a good-ish harvest because I wasn't expecting anything, but some of the potatoes were very small, so I would have planted them in a bigger container next year. That is something that I'll do, but just more food in general. Actually, the only thing that I did have enough of was tomatoes. I did plant a lot of tomato plants, and they did really well this summer. They're still producing fruit. But other than that, I did not plant as much as I should have. Another thing I learned is that I definitely should have thinned out my carrots. So I did carrots in a container. I had 4 containers full of carrots. I just pulled the first container of them the other day and gave them to my aunt, who mentioned she needed carrots for a recipe. So I pulled the first container and I gave them all to her, and the results were pretty pitiful. But I still have 3 more containers to pull, but this is about the size of the carrots. They could have been so much bigger had I actually thinned them out after I planted them and they started growing, or had I just not crowded the container so much with seeds. Again, first year gardener, I didn't know necessarily how many seeds I should be planting, so I know now. I know that they're going to need room to grow. The containers, I think, were big enough, and had I thinned them out, I really think that I would have had a much better crop. So next year I will take note of that, and I will either thin them out or space them out better so that they are not so crowded and I can yield a much better result. Another thing that I learned is that I needed to water more. We had a very, very dry summer, and there were some days where I would depend and count on the rain to come, and it would rain, but only for a very short amount of time, and I should have supplemented with watering, and I did not. So I really think that I could have produced a lot more had I kept up with the watering. And I saw a gentleman on a video talking about how you should soak your vegetables, and it's about the amount of water that you're giving them, not necessarily the amount of times that you're watering them, because the more you water and the more you let that water soak down into the roots, the deeper the roots are going to grow. Instead of just watering them a little bit each day, it's not going to give you the effect that you want of the roots growing down deeper. So definitely something I learned. I do have a water source back here now. At the beginning of the grow season, I was watering with a watering can, and it took like 14 or 15 trips back and forth from the house to the garden to fill up the watering can to water the stuff. So definitely, I think if I did have a water source in the beginning of the grow season back here, I think that that would have helped as well. But definitely something I learned for next year, if we do have a very dry season, is that I definitely need to keep up with my watering. Weeds is another thing. The weeds were overwhelming. I don't use pesticides or weed control or anything like that in my garden because I don't want the chemicals in my garden. And I did not keep up with weeding. There's still, even after we did all of that not construction, but all the digging up and stuff that we did over the weekend, still, there's so many weeds in my garden right now. The thing that grew the most is this plant called, it was like called a shadow soldier or soldier shadow or something like that. Literally, it's everywhere. I see no purpose for it other than making me crazy. The good thing is that it's really easy to pull up, but you have to actually pull it up. So my garden came overgrown with weeds, and I did not stay on top of it, and then that hinders the growth of the vegetation that you're trying to grow, right? Because the weeds are taking up all the nutrients and the water of the things that you're trying to actually grow. So definitely next year I will try to keep up with that. I really would love to do container or raised bed gardens. That is an expense that we were just not ready to pay for this year, and next spring we're going to have to put up a whole new fence. So I'm not sure that that's something that we're going to be able to do next year either. Definitely container growing is something that I could utilize a lot more of. I do have several containers here that I can grow in, so I think that would help minimize the amount of weeds and make them a little bit more manageable. But definitely I did not keep up on the weeds this year, and they took over my garden for sure. The last biggest takeaway I had from being a first-year gardener is that I should not direct sow anything. I did not have any luck with that. Nothing that I planted directly in the soil grew, and I planted pumpkin seeds and gourd seeds and spaghetti squash seeds. None of them grew, and by the time stuff did start growing, the weeds had overtaken where I had grown. So I think next year I will definitely start those things indoors. All of the other plants that I had were started either indoors by me or I got them from a garden center. I will do that again next year, and then if I do have, like, I'm saving seeds from my garden this year that I would like to plant next year, I will start them indoors and not direct sow them, because that just didn't work for me. Another thing that I just thought of too is my cucumbers did not do well. I don't know what I did wrong with them. I definitely need to learn more about growing cucumbers. I did make a trellis for them, which helped them grow up the trellis instead of just sitting on the ground. But I grew two different kinds of cucumbers. I just had regular, like slicing cucumbers, and then I did a pickling cucumber. Each plant, I think, only produced one cucumber, and they were like little round balls. I had never seen cucumbers like that before. I don't know why they grew like that. Did they need more water, more space? I have no idea. So I definitely need to learn more about them. They just didn't do well. And then, like, once the cucumbers did grow and looked like they were ready to pick, they turned white. I don't know if they weren't ripe. I have no idea. So I have so much more learning to do, but I did learn so much about this first year garden, and the things that I did learn will really help me with my crop for next year. So unfortunately for me, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it, I learned a lot of what not to do. But in turn, now I know what to do when I grow my garden next year. Also, I'm definitely going to start it earlier. I think if I started earlier, I would have had better results. I planted a watermelon plant that didn't start producing fruit until way late in the season, and then by that time, a groundhog had dug its way into my garden and eaten the one that was growing well. So I didn't have any fruit from that. Hopefully once we get our new fence up, critters won't be a problem, but there was a groundhog that made its way back here, and then bunnies. I came back here one day and I was not expecting to see a bunny, and so I'm walking through the garden and a bunny jumped, and then I jumped, and It scared me. But so bunnies were definitely a problem, and the groundhog, so hopefully we will not have that problem next year once we have our new fence up. So all in all, it wasn't a terrible season. I did have a lot of squash and tomatoes and the peppers and the beans. I planted flat beans and they did really well. But I do think I will do a better sort of trellis system for them to grow up next year. But all in all, it was a success-ish. For a first-year gardener who's never really done this before, I'm happy with the results, and I'm happy with everything that I learned. So I hope that maybe you can take some of these things that I did if you're a first-year gardener, or even if you're not, and take heed so you don't do the things that I did, so you can produce better results as well. And let me know if you have any tips down in the comments. I would love to hear them. Thank you all for watching this video. Please be sure to give it a thumbs up if you found any value in it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. And please, seriously, if you have tips for me as a first-year gardener, leave them down below so I can learn more as I grow. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.